Welcome to this journey into the heart of ancient myth. The world of Olympus was filled with power, pride, and endless tales. Among the many stories, one stands apart for its quiet intensity. It is not about war or endless battles, but about rivalry of spirit. A contest not of swords, but of pride, gifts, and recognition. On one side stood Poseidon, the mighty god of the sea's depths. His voice was thunder, his trident stirred storms and waves alike. He was fierce, restless, and forever longing for honor from mortals. On the other side shone Apollo, radiant god of light and song. His lyre sang of harmony, his wisdom guided kings and seers. He carried the warmth of the sun and the grace of prophecy. Mortals turned to him for healing, music, and divine clarity. Both gods were worshipped, both revered, yet their paths collided. Each sought to leave a lasting mark on the world of men. Each desired temples, prayers, and songs of devotion in their name. This is the story of how their rivalry grew across time. A tale of waves and sunlight, of music and the deep sea. So let us begin, standing at the edge of myth and memory. Part 1 begins with the sea, wide and restless, echoing the voice of Poseidon, lord of the deep. He was a god whose domain stretched farther than the eye could travel, boundless and unmeasured. The crashing of waves against rocky shores was his drumbeat, steady and eternal in its rhythm. He carried the salt of the ocean in his breath, the rolling tide in his unyielding heart. Mortals feared his storms, yet prayed for his favor, for calm seas meant life and safe passage. Poseidon stood proud, watching ships cross his waters, knowing their journeys lay in his command. His trident shimmered like lightning, a reminder of power that could rise or fall at will. But pride has a way of demanding more, of whispering that reverence is never quite enough. For even as Poseidon ruled the seas, another god's name rose in the voices of mortals. It was Apollo, radiant and golden, god of music, prophecy, and the guiding light of the sun. Apollo's temples shone with marble and song, filled with prayers not drowned by crashing waves. Where Poseidon's realm was raw and restless, Apollo's was calm, ordered, and beautifully adorned. Mortals sang hymns to him at dawn, as light spilled across fields and mountains. Farmers, kings, poets, and seers all sought Apollo's wisdom, craving his radiant touch. Poseidon heard the songs from afar, carried on winds that traveled even to ocean cliffs. The sound unsettled him, like distant thunder hidden beneath calm waters, waiting to break. For Poseidon was not a god to be overlooked, not a name to fade into silence. He remembered times when mortals honored him with sacrifices by the shore, calling for his mercy. He remembered the building of ships, the first oars dipping into the sea in prayer. But now their devotion drifted, like sand slipping through fingers, toward Apollo's light. The rivalry began not with anger, but with longing, a yearning to be seen and revered. Poseidon gazed into the horizon, where sea met sky, and imagined Apollo's golden chariot. The sun god's brilliance spread across his waters, painting them in light Poseidon could not claim. Every sunrise was a reminder that Apollo's reach extended even into the sea's embrace, and every sunset left Poseidon in shadow, until the moon guided his tides once more. Their worlds touched daily, yet neither god yielded ground, each certain of his rightful place. To mortals, the contrast was clear. Poseidon brought strength and danger. Apollo brought clarity and peace. Sailors prayed to one for safe passage, then sang to the other for fortune and joy. Priests whispered of balance, saying the world could not endure without sea and sun alike. But balance was not the same as equality. and rivalry grew in silence between the gods. Poseidon, restless as his tides, could not bear the thought of being overshadowed, and Apollo, shining as the dawn, could not resist the allure of greater devotion. Their paths would cross, not in battle, but in contests of spirit, of gift, of influence. For the world of men was their stage, and mortals their unwitting audience. So begins the tale of a rivalry, quiet yet enduring, between the sea and the sun, a tale where pride shaped destinies, and the gods themselves learned the cost of recognition. The waves still whisper it, the winds still carry it, and the light still recalls it. Poseidon's heart, vast as the sea, against Apollo's brilliance, eternal as the morning sky. This was the spark, the first stirring of tides and light in silent competition. And it was only the beginning of a story that would echo through ages of myth. Part 2 begins not on the sea, but upon the land where cities rose from stone and soil. Among them was Athens, a place of promise, where gods sought to leave their mark. The people longed for guidance, for a divine patron who would guard their city's destiny. It was here that Poseidon's pride met the ambitions of another, not Apollo, but Athena.
Onward, my brethren.
The contest between them became a tale repeated by poets and carved into marble friezes. Poseidon came first, striking the ground with his trident upon the rocky hill of the Acropolis. From the fissure, a saltwater spring surged, gleaming with the restless spirit of the sea. To mortals, it was a sign of power, a gift from the ocean's lord to quench their thirst. Yet the spring tasted of salt, and the Athenians frowned, for it could not nourish the fields. Athena, wise and thoughtful, stepped forward with calm grace and quiet certainty in her eyes. She offered an olive tree, green and sturdy, promising food, oil, and shade for generations. The people cheered her gift, for it was useful, enduring, and kind to their future. Thus, Athens was named for her, not Poseidon, and his pride was wounded deeply. Though the contest was with Athena, Apollo too observed, silent but watchful in the crowd. He admired Athena's wisdom, but also recognized Poseidon's restless hunger for reverence. The rivalry between Poseidon and Apollo grew sharper in that moment, though not yet spoken. For Poseidon's heart, already uneasy with Apollo's rising fame, now carried another slight. He had shown his might, yet mortals turned to gifts of peace over spectacles of power. Apollo, radiant and youthful, drew lessons from this contest that Poseidon could not accept. He saw that mortals loved not only strength, but gentleness, beauty, and enduring wisdom. The olive tree swayed softly in the breeze, its leaves catching sunlight from Apollo's chariot. It was as if the gods' realms intertwined, light feeding the tree, roots reaching to earth. Poseidon looked upon the scene with storm in his gaze, his pride stirred like crashing waves. Apollo's presence seemed brighter now, for his gifts spoke to hearts in ways Poseidon envied. Mortals sought light for their journeys, song for their sorrow, and prophecy for their doubts. What good was a spring of salt water when the sun and the earth gave such abundance? Yet beneath his envy lay a truth Poseidon struggled to admit. Apollo was not his enemy. They were both bound by mortal devotion, drawn into contests for the favor of humankind. Each god sought to be remembered, sung in hymns, honored in temples built of stone. And Athens, in its choice, revealed how fragile and shifting the devotion of mortals could be. Poseidon withdrew to the sea, his trident heavy with silence, his pride carrying the wound. But rivalry, once seeded, does not vanish. It grows quietly like roots beneath the earth. Apollo sensed it in the air, like a chord struck too sharply in a song of harmony. The sea and the sun would meet again, not in Athens, but in countless stories to follow. For this contest, though told as a struggle with Athena, left shadows that touched Apollo too. Poseidon would not forget the cheer of mortals, nor the way their eyes sought light. And Apollo would not forget Poseidon's silent glance, deep as the tide, heavy with pride. So Athens became a stage, not just of wisdom and olive groves, but of divine rivalry, a reminder that gods themselves are moved by mortal voices, as restless as the sea. And so the tale of Poseidon and Apollo deepened, its current flowing beyond a single city. The story of pride, longing, and the need to be remembered had only begun to unfold. Part 3 turns our gaze from Athens to the sacred slopes of Mount Parnassus. Here lay Delphi, a place destined to become one of the brightest jewels of Apollo's domain. Long before Apollo claimed it, the land was shrouded in mystery, guarded by ancient powers. A great serpent was said to dwell there, coiled in the shadow of the earth's navel. Mortals spoke of strange whispers rising from cracks in the stone, voices of prophecy and fate. To Poseidon, Delphi was once a place linked with his own mysteries of the deep. He was honored there in older days, when sailors and priests came to seek omens of the sea. But time has a way of shifting, and mortal devotion follows the light of new gods. When Apollo came, radiant and bold, Delphi opened to him like a flower to the sun. He built his temple there with music, with order, and with the harmony of oracles. Priestesses, the Pythia, sat upon the sacred tripod, inhaling vapors and speaking his visions. Kings and warriors traveled far to kneel, waiting for Apollo's words to guide their paths. The songs sung at Delphi carried across Greece, weaving Apollo's name into every heart. Poseidon watched this rise with unease, for once again his presence faded from mortal memory. He still commanded the seas, but Delphi now echoed not with waves, but with hymns of light. To him, it felt as though Apollo had stolen not just a sanctuary, but a legacy. For prophecy and the deep had always shared kinship, mystery lying in both ocean and oracle. Yet mortals now looked upward, to sunlight and music, instead of downward into the abyss. Poseidon's pride rippled like a storm-touched tide, restless beneath the calm face of Olympus. He knew Apollo's temple at Delphi shone brighter with each passing year. Its marble columns gleamed in dawn's first light, its steps crowded with mortals bearing gifts. The sea god's shrines, in comparison, lay scattered on rugged coasts, humble before crashing surf. There was grandeur in his waters, yes, but not the ordered beauty mortals adored in Apollo. The rivalry grew not from hatred, but from the sting of being overshadowed. Poseidon longed for reverence equal to the sun, God's golden glory. He wondered why mortals favored the warmth of prophecy over the awe of the untamed sea. Apollo, for his part, did not flaunt his triumph, but he could not hide his pride. Delphi was proof of his bond with mortals, a sanctuary of light against shadows. And in this triumph, he felt closer to Zeus himself, radiant and central in Olympus's order. Yet somewhere in his heart, Apollo sensed Poseidon's watching gaze, heavy as a gathering storm. For even among gods, recognition is never freely given, but constantly earned and contested. The sea and the sun stood opposed, each shaping mortal lives in different ways. One guided ships across restless waters, the other guided souls toward unseen futures. Mortals needed both, though their hearts seemed to tilt more toward the golden light. And so Delphi became a symbol, not just of prophecy, but of rivalry unspoken. Every chant sung in Apollo's name carried an echo that reached Poseidon's restless ear. Every offering placed at Delphi's altar deepened the silence of Poseidon's coastal shrines. This was no war, no clash of tridents or arrows, but a quieter battle of reverence. It was pride against pride, gift against gift, devotion against devotion. In Delphi's rising glory, the rivalry found new strength, a current flowing beneath the sun, and Poseidon's heart swelled with the tides of envy, waiting for its chance to surge. So the story deepened, not in thunder or flame, but in the slow pull of destiny. The oracle's breath carried visions, yet none told how gods wrestled for mortal love. Still, the sea remembered, the mountains whispered, and Apollo's light blazed higher each dawn. Thus Delphi stood as a turning point, where rivalry no longer lingered, but firmly took root. Part 4 begins with the gifts of the gods, tokens offered to mortals as proof of their favor. Poseidon, lord of the sea, often gave gifts that reflected his restless and mighty nature. From his hands came the horse, powerful and swift, born from the foam of the waves. To mortals, the horse was a marvel, carrying them across land with speed unknown before. It was a creature of strength and freedom, echoing the untamed spirit of the ocean. Yet Poseidon's other gift was the saltwater spring, a reminder of his claim upon the earth. Though striking and wondrous, the spring was less useful, its water bitter, its promise limited. Mortals admired the power, but turned their gaze toward gifts that sustained daily life. Apollo, in contrast, gave gifts that touched the heart and nourished the soul. He brought music, his lyre filling the air with harmony that softened sorrow and lifted joy. He gave healing, teaching mortals remedies and easing the burdens of illness and pain. Most of all, he gave prophecy, a light in the darkness, guiding kings and common folk alike. His gifts were not violent or overwhelming, but gentle, radiant, and deeply cherished. Mortals loved them, for they offered peace, hope, and clarity when life grew uncertain. The contrast between the gods' offerings revealed much about their rivalry. Poseidon's gifts reflected grandeur and force, demanding respect through awe and fear. Apollo's gifts reflected beauty and wisdom, drawing love through gentleness and trust. Mortals could not help but be drawn toward the gifts that eased their struggles. Songs spread across villages, temples rose in Apollo's honor, and festivals celebrated his light. Meanwhile, Poseidon's shrines stood by stormy coasts, honored with sacrifice, yet filled with unease. Fishermen prayed for calm seas, but their songs were fewer, their joy less abundant. Poseidon noticed this imbalance, feeling pride wounded each time Apollo's name was sung. He wondered why mortals chose music over might, prophecy over power, light over depth. The horse remained a noble gift, yet even it came to symbolize more than Poseidon's strength. Riders carried it into battle under Athena's strategies or sang of it under Apollo's hymns. It was as if his own creation slipped into the realms of other gods' influence. Apollo, radiant and serene, seemed unaware of the shadow his gifts cast upon Poseidon. Yet somewhere within, he sensed the unspoken rivalry, like a chord struck off key. He knew Poseidon's gifts were mighty, but he also knew mortals craved gentler blessings. And so the gods' rivalry grew not in confrontation, but in the hearts of humankind. Every gift given was a silent contest. Every prayer offered a measure of devotion. Poseidon roared in storms, his waves striking cliffs with thunderous force, demanding reverence. Apollo answered with sunlight, breaking the clouds, with melodies soothing fears of the tempest. Mortals lived between them, torn between fear of the sea and love of the sun. To them, the sea was power to be respected, but Apollo's light was life itself. Thus the gifts became symbols, shaping how gods were remembered across ages of myth. Poseidon's horse thundered across plains, yet Apollo's lyre echoed forever in mortal hearts. The spring of salt water stood silent, while prophecy from Delphi shaped kings and empires. And so the rivalry deepened, not through weapons, but through the legacies of their gifts. One god sought awe, the other devotion, and mortals gave both, but never equally. This imbalance was a wound that lingered as deep as the sea itself. Poseidon's pride surged like a tide, Apollo's light spread like dawn, and mortals chose between them. Thus the tale of gifts became another chapter in their enduring rivalry, a contest of spirit, subtle yet profound, echoing in every prayer whispered to the gods. Part 5 turns to a contest that would echo through ages, the claim over a sacred city. That city was Athens, a place destined to shine with wisdom, culture, and enduring fame. Both Poseidon and Apollo longed for the devotion of its people and the honor of its temples. But the true contest narrowed to Poseidon and Athena, goddess of wisdom and strategy. Still, Apollo's shadow lingered, for his gifts of harmony shaped how the contest was seen. Poseidon struck first, arriving before the people of Athens with a promise of power. He raised his trident and brought forth a saltwater spring from the rock of the Acropolis. The water rushed forth, glittering under the sun, a marvel of divine force. The people marveled, yet when they tasted it, they found the water bitter and undrinkable. It was wondrous, but not sustaining, a symbol of the sea's might, but not of daily survival. Athena came forward, calm and deliberate, carrying a gift shaped by patience and care. She planted the first olive tree, its roots firm, its branches spreading shade and promise. The tree offered fruit to eat, oil for light, and wood for shelter and tools. The people rejoiced, for the olive meant life, sustenance, and lasting prosperity. Poseidon's pride burned, for his spring was less cherished than her humble tree. He demanded the people reconsider, arguing that power was more valuable than patience. But mortals saw the olive's promise of peace and plenty, and they chose Athena. Thus the city was named Athens, honoring wisdom over force, foresight over pride. Apollo, though not a direct rival here, watched closely from his radiant seat. He saw how gifts that touched the heart outweighed those that merely inspired awe. His lyre strummed quietly, as if to remind all that harmony shapes destiny. Poseidon's disappointment grew into silent fury, for yet again his gift was overshadowed. He could not bear the thought of losing devotion, of being placed second in memory. The rivalry between gods deepened, though no blade was drawn, no storm unleashed in war. Instead, the battle was waged in symbols, in temples, and in the choices of mortals. Athens became the shining jewel of wisdom, but the sea still roared at its shores. Every time waves struck the cliffs, it was as though Poseidon's voice reminded them. He was not forgotten, but he was not chosen, and that wounded his immortal pride. Apollo's role in this chapter was quiet, but it shaped his own confidence. He saw how Athena's gift resembled his own, gentle, enduring, and life-giving. It was not thunder that won hearts, but wisdom and light, music and growth. In the rivalry with Poseidon, Apollo found strength in watching another god prevail gently. For if Athena's olive tree could define a city, Apollo's lyre could define generations. The people of Athens built temples to both Athena and Apollo, celebrating wisdom and song. Poseidon received offerings too, yet his temple stood apart, touched by storms and silence. Mortals balanced their prayers, but the weight of devotion leaned toward wisdom and harmony. The gods themselves could not change the will of the people once a gift was chosen. Athena's tree grew for centuries, a living reminder of choice, of peace, of foresight. Poseidon's spring still flowed, but its waters remained untasted, bitter, and unclaimed. Thus, the contest of Athens became more than a rivalry between gods. It became a lesson in what mortals sought and what they cherished most deeply. And Poseidon, though mighty, began to realize that force alone could not win hearts. While Apollo, watching, grew ever more certain of the path that light and music must follow. This chapter closed with Athens shining bright, yet the rivalry still stirring like waves below. Part 6 turns our gaze to the sacred site of Delphi, where Apollo's presence shone brightest. High upon Mount Parnassus, the air carried whispers of fate, and mortals climbed to seek guidance. The oracle of Delphi spoke with a voice shaped by Apollo's gift, a channel to divine wisdom. Kings came with heavy crowns, warriors with burdens of choice, and farmers with questions of life. All listened to the priestess, her words shaped by Apollo's light, carrying truth wrapped in mystery. The sanctuary became a center of the world, a place where prophecy guided nations and hearts. It was here that Apollo's influence reached its height, his name spoken in reverent tones. Temples rose with marble columns, offerings filled chambers, and songs echoed in his honor. Mortals carried home his guidance like torches in the night, lighting paths otherwise unseen. Poseidon, from the vast sea, watched with growing unease as Apollo's fame spread inland. His own shrine stood by coasts, visited by sailors, fishermen, and those who feared storms. But Delphi belonged to Apollo, and its power grew beyond the sea's endless horizon. The people revered Poseidon, but they adored Apollo, for his words reached into their hearts. Poseidon's voice was thunderous waves, yet Apollo's voice was gentle truth, and it prevailed. Rivalry simmered in silence, for Poseidon could not storm Delphi without breaking sacred bounds. Still, he yearned to turn mortals' prayers back to the sea, to his restless domain. Stories say Poseidon tried to claim Delphi once, sending tremors that shook the earth. The ground split, waters surged, as if the sea sought to drown the sacred site. But Apollo stood firm, his light shielding the sanctuary, his presence unyielding as the sun. The priests and priestesses told mortals that Delphi would forever belong to the god of light. Poseidon's attempt left no lasting mark, for Apollo's temple remained, shining brighter than before. The oracle's words spread even farther, shaping wars, alliances, and destinies of empires. Poseidon's storms frightened men, but Apollo's words guided them, and guidance held greater power. Even the sea could not silence prophecy, for mortals carried it in memory and song. Poseidon's pride grew heavier, like waves crashing without end against unyielding cliffs. Apollo, radiant and calm, knew the rivalry was no longer hidden, but lived in hearts. Every festival at Delphi reminded Poseidon of what he lacked: adoration born from trust. Mortals sought him for fear, but Apollo for love, and the balance tilted once more. The gods of Olympus watched in silence, for such rivalry shaped not only temples, but fate. Athena, who had once rivaled Poseidon, recognized the wound of pride he now carried. She knew Apollo's gifts, like her own, spoke to the endurance of mortal life. Poseidon's realm was vast, but it demanded reverence. Apollo's light gave comfort freely, This difference defined their contest, silent but profound, echoing across the ancient world. Delphi's stones still stand today, carrying the memory of that divine rivalry. Columns rise toward the sky, as if reaching for Apollo's sun, untouched by sea's salt. The mountain air still whispers, carrying echoes of prophecies once spoken in Apollo's name. Though the sea rages endlessly, its tides cannot erase what light has carved into stone. And so, Delphi became more than a sanctuary. It became a symbol of divine victory. Apollo's triumph here was not just over Poseidon, but over doubt, silence, and fear. Poseidon's waves still thunder, but Delphi remains unmoved, its heart beating with Apollo's song. Thus, Part 6 closes with the sun shining bright over sacred marble and eternal prophecy. Part 7 turns our story to the mortal realm, where kings and cities bore the mark of divine rivalry. Mortals lived not only under the sun or by the sea, but between the influence of gods themselves. Their choices of devotion often reflected the balance of fear, love, need, and gratitude. Some turned to Poseidon, offering prayers at dawn before setting sail upon restless waters. They poured wine into the waves, begging calm seas and safe passage for their fragile ships. To these mortals, Poseidon was not just a god, but a force that decided life and death. Others turned to Apollo, filling temples with song, lyres echoing at festivals of light. They sought his guidance before battles, his comfort during plagues, and his wisdom in peace. Where Poseidon's gifts brought survival, Apollo's gifts brought meaning, and mortals craved both. Yet the difference remained. One god received prayers of fear, the other received prayers of love. Stories of rulers reflected this divide, for kings often chose the god that suited their reign. Seafaring leaders praised Poseidon, claiming his storms showed strength to enemies and allies alike. But wise rulers sought Apollo, believing his prophecy and music brought stability to their throne. Thus kingdoms grew divided, not in open conflict, but in the currents of faith and memory. A fisherman's child might whisper Poseidon's name before sleep, fearing waves that could steal her father. But the same child, in times of sickness, would pray to Apollo for healing and hope. Mortals wove both names into their lives, yet rarely in equal measure, favoring Apollo's gentleness. Poseidon felt this imbalance like a wound, knowing devotion slipped through his fingers like sand. His pride thundered, but mortals could not be forced to love, only to revere or fear. Apollo, ever radiant, accepted their offerings with calm, his temples filled with joy, not dread. Festivals in his honor filled cities with song, light, and laughter that carried into the night. Meanwhile, Poseidon's rituals carried solemn tones, marked by sacrifice, storm, and the scent of salt. This difference defined how mortals remembered them, shaping myths that echoed through generations. A farmer might tell his child that Poseidon could crush the earth with a single strike. But the same farmer would add that Apollo's voice could heal sorrow and guide destiny. Thus, the gods lived in stories, not only in temples, but in fireside whispers and songs. Poseidon's name carried weight, but Apollo's name carried warmth, and mortals clung to warmth. The rivalry spread beyond Olympus, taking root in the mortal world with each passing age. Even wars bore traces of it, for armies sought different gods before marching into uncertainty. Ships carried Poseidon's blessing, carved into their wood, while banners bore Apollo's golden sun. Mortals gave shape to the gods' rivalry in every choice, every story, every prayer spoken. The gods themselves rarely intervened directly, yet their presence weighed on human hearts unendingly. Poseidon saw sailors bow in fear, while Apollo saw poets lift voices in gratitude and praise. The sea and the sun became metaphors for divine power, one untamed, the other illuminating. And though both were necessary, mortals leaned toward the light, for it gave them hope. Poseidon's pride remained restless, like waves crashing against rocks, never satisfied with fleeting devotion. Apollo's joy was steady, like sunlight over fields, endlessly renewed by mortal love. In this way, the rivalry deepened, carried not only by gods, but by those who worshipped. For every shrine at the shore, a temple rose inland, glowing with Apollo's presence. Every prayer to the sea was met with 10 more to the sun, and so it remained. Part 7 closes with mortals as the stage of divine rivalry, torn between fear and love. Part 8 brings us to a contest that echoed through myth, a tale of gifts and claims upon the earth. Poseidon and Apollo each longed to be remembered through devotion, tied to places, cities, and sacred lands. It was not enough to hold temples. They sought to anchor themselves in the hearts of nations forever. The land of Attica became the stage, a place where gods would stake their claim through divine offerings. Poseidon struck first, raising his trident high and driving it into the rocky soil with mighty force. From the ground burst a spring of salt water, shimmering, restless, and filled with the breath of the sea. The water roared, a symbol of power, a promise of naval strength and mastery over restless tides. He declared, "This gift shall grant you dominion over the oceans, ships, and journeys across the world." The people marveled, yet doubt stirred in their hearts. For salt water was abundant, but brought little daily use. Apollo's twin sister, Athena, soon entered the contest. Yet Apollo's presence loomed in counsel and vision. Apollo favored gifts of peace, wisdom, and foresight, for he saw mortals as seekers of knowledge and light. Athena offered the olive tree, humble yet eternal, bearing fruit, oil, wood, and promise of prosperity. Where Poseidon's spring was wild and fierce, Athena's tree was gentle, enduring, and full of quiet strength. The people weighed both gifts, torn between the power of the sea and the blessings of the land. Apollo, though not the challenger, spoke softly, praising the olive as a symbol of peace and harmony. He reminded mortals that light and wisdom bring more lasting fortune than power born of storm and wave. The people of Attica listened, their hearts swayed not by fear but by the promise of life's abundance. Thus, they chose Athena's gift, crowning her patron of the land, their devotion bound to olive and wisdom. Poseidon's fury thundered, the earth trembled, waves crashed against Attica as if to swallow it whole. Yet no blood was shed, no blade drawn, only pride wounded and honor contested in divine silence. Apollo stood serene, his counsel honored, his voice a guiding presence, though not the central challenger. This moment deepened Poseidon's rivalry with Apollo, for he felt the sun god's calm light eclipsed his storm. It was not Athena alone who bested him, but the quiet influence of Apollo's wisdom and voice. The tale became legend, told by poets and priests, passed through generations as a lesson of balance. It showed that mortals prefer gifts that nurture daily life over powers that inspire only awe and fear. Poseidon learned that raw might, though dazzling, could not bind devotion as love and peace could. Apollo shone brighter in mortal memory, not for conquest, but for guiding hearts toward harmony and trust. The gods of Olympus watched in silence, for such contests revealed the true desires of humankind. Some gods admired Poseidon's boldness, others favored Apollo's gentle counsel, but none doubted the rivalry deepened. For Poseidon, every rejection was a wound. For Apollo, every choice for peace was a quiet triumph. Yet the story carried no hatred, only the eternal tension between storm and sunlight, sea and sky. Mortals still honored Poseidon at their shores, casting offerings into waves before voyages across unknown waters. But inland, Apollo's name echoed in temples, his hymns rising like sunbeams over olive groves and fields. This contest became a symbol, not of victory or defeat, but of the paths mortals choose to walk. Would they bow to fear and force, or would they embrace wisdom, light, and the peace of song? Poseidon's spring still flowed, a reminder of his might, though its waters could not quench human thirst. Apollo's voice lingered in memory, his counsel guiding not through force, but through music, prophecy, and light. Thus ended the contest, not with weapons, but with symbols that shaped the destiny of a people. And so the rivalry endured, not through destruction, but through stories carried on the breath of time. Part 9 shifts our tale to the temples that rose like bridges between mortals and the divine. Each temple was more than stone and marble. It was a voice lifted in devotion to gods above. In the land of Delphi, Apollo's sanctuary stood, glowing with prophecy, music, and endless streams of worshippers. Mortals traveled far, crossing mountains and seas, to hear the oracle speak words shaped by Apollo's light. The temple was alive with song, with lyres plucked in harmony, with prayers whispered under pillars of gold. Here, Apollo's presence was felt not in storms, but in the clarity of words guiding kings and seekers. The god of light and prophecy was woven into the rhythm of human destiny with gentle permanence. Each question asked of the oracle was met with a riddle, carrying the breath of Apollo's wisdom. Mortals trusted him, not because they feared, but because they longed for certainty in a fragile world. Poseidon too had temples, towering near the sea, carved into cliffs, kissed by the foam of crashing waves. His sanctuaries were solemn, filled with offerings from sailors, fishermen, and kings who prayed for safe journeys. Statues of horses and tridents marked his presence, symbols of strength, speed, and power over the tides. The scent of salt water clung to altars, and the sound of waves echoed like hymns to his might. Worshippers came trembling, pouring wine into the sea, asking the god to calm storms and spare lives. Poseidon's temples were places of awe and fear, shadows of reverence cast under endless crashing surf. Yet within these walls, Poseidon's heart yearned for something beyond fear, for devotion born of love. He looked upon Apollo's temples and saw joy, music, laughter, and the warm light of mortal gratitude. In Delphi, people sang for Apollo, but in Poseidon's sanctuaries, they begged and bargained for mercy. The difference cut deep, for both gods received prayers, but Apollo's echoed with affection, Poseidon's with fear. This contrast fed the rivalry, turning temples into silent symbols of what mortals valued most in gods. Priests of Apollo spoke of light, healing, and harmony, words that traveled far beyond their sacred walls. Poets sang of him in marketplaces, shepherds hummed his hymns, and children repeated his verses in play. By contrast, Poseidon's name was spoken with caution, whispered before voyages, shouted in storms, feared in silence. Yet sailors still carved his symbols into their boats, trusting his might to guide them through the sea. For without him, no journey could begin, no fish caught, no trade carried across restless waters. Thus, Poseidon remained essential, powerful, yet distant, like the sea itself. Needed, but never fully embraced. Mortals needed Apollo's comfort, but they also needed Poseidon's strength, though their devotion felt unbalanced. The gods themselves noticed this difference. for each temple revealed not only power, but the desires of mortals. Where Apollo's walls shone with gold and song, Poseidon's echoed with storms and unyielding salt. The rivalry was not written in battle, but in architecture, hymns, and the choices of human hearts. Even the festivals reflected this truth. Apollo's filled with music and feasts, Poseidon's marked with solemn rites. One brought celebration, the other survival, and both shaped the rhythm of life across the land. Yet Poseidon longed for more, for love that matched Apollo's, for laughter within his own temples. His pride thundered like waves, for he knew he was mighty, yet wondered why joy escaped his grasp. Apollo, in contrast, carried no envy, his temples overflowing with offerings that came freely, joyfully, without fear. Part 9 leaves us with temples standing as silent storytellers, reflecting the rivalry through stone and devotion. For in each prayer, song, and sacrifice, the rivalry between Poseidon and Apollo lived on in mortal memory. Part 10 takes us into the realm of music and art, where Apollo's gifts burned brightest and clearest. Apollo was master of the lyre, his fingers weaving melodies that calmed storms and stirred human hearts. His music carried wisdom, joy, and healing, flowing into the lives of mortals like sunlight on stone. Poets and bards called on him before reciting, asking that their words carry beauty and lasting truth. Painters and sculptors also honored him, carving his form as the embodiment of grace, harmony, and light. His temples rang not only with prayer, but with song, contests of verse, and echoes of golden strings. In contrast, Poseidon's name was rarely sung, for his domain was not melody, but thunder and silence. He ruled the sound of waves, the roar of storms, the crash of water against unyielding cliffs. Mortals heard his power in the deep night, when the sea itself seemed to breathe and rage. But Poseidon, though mighty, envied Apollo's gift of joy, for joy brought mortals closer than fear. He wondered why his name inspired trembling, while Apollo's name inspired laughter, song, and radiant celebration. Apollo once hosted a contest of music, his lyre against Marsyas, a satyr who challenged him. The tale ended in sorrow, but it showed Apollo's mastery, unmatched even among divine or mortal hands. Poseidon did not envy Marsyas, but he envied the way Apollo turned sound into devotion eternal. Where Poseidon's waves silenced mortals, Apollo's music lifted their voices and filled their gatherings with light. Festivals dedicated to Apollo were bright with dance, poetry, and hymns that echoed across valleys and fields. Poseidon's festivals, though vital, carried gravity, marked by sacrifice and solemn prayers to calm the sea. This difference grew sharper with time, for mortals sought not only survival, but joy in their lives. And joy, it seemed, belonged to Apollo, woven into every note, painting, and whispered verse of love. Poseidon sought to rival this in his own way, shaping beauty in the sea's hidden treasures. Pearls, corals, and dolphins became his symbols, reminders that the ocean too held elegance and grace. But his treasures were silent, while Apollo's songs moved freely, carried on air, remembered in human hearts. Artists painted Apollo in golden hues, surrounded by muses, his lyre shining like a piece of the sun. Few painted Poseidon with such warmth, for his image was stern, commanding, wrapped in storm and salt. Yet within his heart, Poseidon longed to be sung, to be remembered with love, not only fear. Apollo never sought to diminish him, but his brilliance cast shadows where Poseidon's pride already ached. The rivalry deepened in silence, carried not by blows, but by music that Poseidon could not match. Still, some poets dared to honor the sea. singing of its mystery, its vastness, its hidden depths. But even then, their verses ended with Apollo, for light was needed to give words their shape. The Muses, companions of Apollo, danced in his presence, granting inspiration to poets and singers alike. No such muses graced Poseidon. Though the sea had nymphs and spirits, they lacked Apollo's divine harmony. Thus, art became another field where Apollo thrived, and Poseidon's pride found itself restless and unsatisfied. Mortals remembered storms, but they remembered songs more. For songs were carried, retold, and sung again. A storm ended, a wave receded, but a song could linger for centuries, reshaping memory and faith. This truth wounded Poseidon more than storms could wound land, for it meant Apollo ruled the unseen. Part 10 closes with a reflection that music and art gave Apollo a crown Poseidon could not seize. And so, the rivalry endured, deepened not by weapons, but by the quiet triumph of melody and light. The tale now draws to its closing, yet the rivalry between Poseidon and Apollo still lingers like a distant echo. It was never a rivalry of swords or blood, but of influence, pride, and the longing to be remembered. Apollo, with his golden lyre, gave mortals hope, joy, and light, weaving beauty into their daily lives and faith. Poseidon, with his trident and vast seas, commanded respect, fear, and survival, shaping the boundaries of mortal existence. The world needed both, though mortals leaned toward the warmth of Apollo's gifts and celebrating life and its wonders. Yet without Poseidon, their ships would not sail, their coasts would not thrive, and their journeys would not begin. In truth, the gods represented balance, each holding a place in the great harmony that shaped both land and sea. Apollo embodied creation, melody, and healing, while Poseidon embodied power, endurance, and the mysteries of the deep. The rivalry between them was less about victory, more about reflection of how mortals chose joy over fear. Still, Poseidon's storms reminded humanity that strength cannot be ignored, that reverence is born not only from delight. And Apollo's songs reminded them that survival is not enough, for the soul longs for beauty as much as bread. Together, their opposition became a dance, one ruling the waters, the other ruling the heart and imagination. Legends say the gods often argued, yet when the world was in peril, they stood together as brothers. For rivalry may sting, but it is also a bond, a reminder that greatness is measured against another's light. The Greeks built temples to both, placing offerings on altars to calm the seas and to bless the harvests. Sailors whispered Poseidon's name before voyages, and poets whispered Apollo's before beginning verses or striking the lyre. Mortals knew both gods could bless or deny them, so their reverence balanced fear with love, awe with trust. The rivalry became part of myth not because of battles won, but because it revealed the depth of desire. Poseidon longed to be cherished as much as feared, while Apollo longed to guide as much as inspire. Through them, mortals saw themselves, torn between survival and beauty, power and art, storm and song. Perhaps this is why the tale endures, not as a warning, but as a mirror of human longing. For what are we if not like the gods, caught between strength and tenderness, fear and joy? The sea still roars, carrying Poseidon's voice, deep and eternal, reminding us of forces beyond our control. And the music still plays, echoing Apollo's gift, reminding us that life is more than storms and silence. One cannot exist without the other, for storms teach us to value calm, and fear teaches us joy. The rivalry never ended, nor was it meant to, for it was not a fight to win, but a balance. As long as waves crash and songs rise, the spirits of Poseidon and Apollo will linger in the world, Their rivalry shaped myths, and myths shaped people, who in turn carried these stories to every shore and valley. And so, when you hear the sea, think of Poseidon, vast, unyielding, yet filled with hidden wonders and grace. When you hear music, think of Apollo, radiant, kind, and ever guiding, reminding you of light within shadows. The tale closes not with triumph, but with harmony. For even rivals serve the same truth in different ways. Poseidon and Apollo were never only rivals. They were reflections of what mortals needed, feared, and loved the most. And perhaps that is why their story endures, whispered across centuries, carried by both storm and song.